Hi, hi. Hmm. Hi, hi. Hmm. Hi, hi. No, wait, all of this is okay. Hmm. I'm guessing I'm not gonna watch it like that. Hold on. I didn't even watch it like that. What the fuck? Okay. Hold on. Test, test, one, two. Yeah, we're cool.
Yeah, so I went into that not at all expecting that. I did not expect to
Mm-hmm.
be talking to someone who turns out to be like what I did not expect to talk to be what
Whatever. Mm, hmm. Okay. Anyway.
I have termed the ultimate skeptic. I'm not, and I guess that would be roughly defined as someone who rejects any sort of objective standard by which to judge anything, whether it be a theory of morality, a theory of truth, a theory of meaning, a theory of justification, or any sort of definitions. There would be no, it's all completely arbitrary.
But
And
how
it's
could you
up to
even
an individual person.
you couldn't even call that a skeptic, in my opinion. I think that's too
That's,
much of a
I mean, it
too much of a
reminds me
position.
of Wittgenstein's quote when he says, the game of doubt itself presupposes certainty. You're right. I don't know what you call it, to be honest.
Wrong.
I agree with that, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's as you saw, I mean, I find it very difficult to engage with those people, and I always come away with it with people telling me, "Oh, rhetorically, you were awful. You weren't actually addressing the arguments." I mean, I agree. I definitely need to work on rhetoric in terms of convincing someone like that. But I honestly still am not sure. What is the method by which you go about convincing someone who believes that everything is completely arbitrary? I mean, it leads to conclusions like whether the Holocaust happened or not. The truth of that depends on what you think. Or
I don't mean to sound.
I remember Vaush saying some real stupid shit in that talk they had.
It's a fact of the world. I don't think you can
Yeah.
empirically justify any of this. All of history and all of thought is just power grabs between people who can decide subjectively whether or not their positions are better than others.
Power grabs.
Unironically,
Wow.
in some cases,
The truth of whether the Holocaust happened, a power grab.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay. Yes.
Well,
I don't mean to sound bad, but I mean the fact that he said that 2 + 2 could equals 5 in a different mathematical system, so maths is subjective, is probably what I think I might have actually had like some sort of like I think I might have like fainted or something at that point because I just sort of blacked out. I think the point of the matter is that if you're willing to deny the epistemic norms of something that's a priori and or a priori synthetic, and you're willing to deny all knowledge and all truth claims.
okay. So, a statement like 2 + 2 = 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are multiple theories of truth. Something can be true because it's actually existing in the world, right? Which is probably what you view truth as. The cup is red is true if it is actually okay. There's another theory of truth. It could be something is true if and only if it makes me feel good, right? My question to you would then be, well, which of those theories of truth should I adopt?
It depends on which moral system you subscribe to. If you subscribe to a different one and that causes me harm, I could just like kill you.
That theories of truth are moral statements.
Yeah, because you have to make an argument to justify one or the other, right?
What about a theory of meaning?
I mean, I'm going to bite the bullet on all of this. It's completely subjective.
So you're a complete nihilist.
I'm not. I mean, moral nihilist. Can you define?
There's no truth. There's nothing is objective. Nothing is true, or it's all relative to what someone wants.
Yeah,
everything.
But I do think you can make empirical statements about the world.
That depends on you.
Wait, yes, the morality of the Holocaust depends on your subjective.
Whether it happened.
Whether it happened?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, if you have a different definition of truth, then yeah. But if a person
you can't say that they're wrong, they're just in a different framework.
Oh no, well, I don't have to say that they're wrong. All I have to do is convince them.
Right now, you are basically saying that.
I would disagree with them. I would try to convince them off that point.
Yeah, you would disagree with them, but you have to acknowledge from this,
Yes, I acknowledge that. I've always acknowledged that. Yeah, it's about power.
You're in a state of complete nihilism about the world. No one's position is more justified than another.
Inherently, no. Correct.
Wow. Okay. So you're literally in complete. So actually, right now, if I wanted to, I could flip a coin, and if it lands heads or tails, I'm correct about this issue, and you have no way to refute what I just said.
Empirically, no. But I could argue that that's dumb.
Wow. Well, doesn't matter. I mean, if you just acknowledge all you do is just scream at people to make
you should do that.
Wait, yeah, wait,
fine.
Wait, no, I don't. Wait, I don't scream at people.
So you don't care about truth in the world, I guess.
Wait, yeah, I do. I care about my truth in the world.
Yeah, you care about how you feel.
Yeah, yes, because all moral positions are downstream of our subjective emotional preferences. How many times do I have to refrain this?
No, it's crazy to me hearing you say it. That's all I'm doing. I'm concerned about what the truth of your position is and what it leads to necessarily. So I'm not concerned about what people hold to be true in the world. I'm concerned about what theory of truth is going to be right or not.
Well, I don't think there is a right theory of truth. I just think there's one that makes me
It's
happiest.
all arbitrary, right? So, okay.
Then I think the very words that you speak are so nonsensical anyway. As in, like, literally, what you are saying is that I could not know that your words mean what they do in any way, shape, or form. So, really, you're active. I would say that you're being I'd say you're being a hypocrite in speaking, in that you're asserting that your sentence has grammatical structure which can be interpreted objectively. I would
And
say
I don't
that
know.
outright.
I don't know if you saw the part there where I tried to basically show that, but it's very difficult to communicate to that,
Oh.
especially in a heated position. So you try to like, okay, I'll flip a coin, and if it lands heads or tails, I'm always right.
Explain. Well, it is absurd. It's a reductio ad absurdum. That's the argument that I'm giving.
I don't think there's anything absurd about it. Moral judgments can't be made empirically, so everything is downstream of subjective preference.
So everything is completely relative, but including meaning. So when I'm saying words to you right now, right, whether I mean this or that is completely relative. So you live in your own bubble, and that's it.
Well, you and I agree on like the definitions of the words we're using, unless I've been misinterpreting.
So you're acknowledging that moral realism is right.
No. What?
Yes, you are. By saying no, you're acknowledging that it's right.
No, because I'm saying that there's utility to be derived from our shared understanding of the words we're
within
using.
my own subjective framework, everything you say supports moral realism.
I don't see how.
What do you mean? You acknowledge that everything's downstream from our subjective values, including truth and whatnot. So all the statements you make are actually agreeing with my own position.
I don't know how that means agreeing with your own position, but if you want to reframe
because from my framework, everything that you say out of your mouth, that's like an axiom in my system, just agrees with me. Because as you've acknowledged, no one's position is more justifiable than another.
Sure. I would just disagree with you.
Well, no, you're agreeing with me by my position.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yes.
I don't understand what you're going on about right now.
I'm trying to show the absurdity of what your position leads to.
I don't think there's any absurdity.
That's not that run.
Or I'll interpret everything you say, because under my theory of meaning, which is arbitrary,
I'm gonna go
I'll interpret everything you say as just supporting my position. Because, under that framework, that works. But obviously, that's supposed to highlight the absurdity, but they don't see absurdity as an argument.
Well, this is the strange thing. I think that when I was watching it, it had very little. I think he basically boiled it all down to power, and he said, "This is might makes right." And like, I think the weird thing is that I think it's a very easy thing to go down if you feel like you're backed into a corner. Like, my presuppositions aren't your presuppositions. Leave me alone. And I think that the funny thing is for him to even know his presuppositions in the first place, he didn't have knowledge of his own presuppositions. He's already, made that foundational leap of logic where he asserts that logic is true. But I think what he did was way more bad faith than anything else. Like, I don't think it had anything to do with what he was actually saying. I think it had everything to do with coming out with a rhetorical victory. And I mean, that's all I can kind of take from it. The guy's a socialist, and he was denying at that point all moral claims.
This whole discussion, this is really what's underlying the dispute.
That I can't believe in facts of the world because I'm a
no. That you don't believe that moral statements have truth value.
Yeah.
He was denying not only all moral claims, but then started denying all epistemic claims about reality, to the point in which he was willing to deny the Holocaust, and he was willing to say that the only thing that differs between him and a fascist is that he considers himself not a fascist.
That you can arbitrarily draw lines anywhere. That is my concession. I believe that, and I have always believed that, and I have always been consistent in that position.
So you acknowledge that your system has severe deficiencies.
I don't think it's a deficiency. I think it's a fact of the world that moral positions are arbitrary, and the best thing that we can do is try to resolve our differences without appealing to an objective morality.
Moral positions are
because I can learn
anything
from
but
you. Are you seriously not going to
You're learning
answer?
another arbitrary thing in the world.
Yeah, maybe your
What's
arbitrary thing in the world is better. Wait, are you saying you should never try to educate people on like moral realist positions because
no,
if they
absolutely
disagree
not. I'm saying that perhaps this should shed some light on why a moral anti-realist position is completely untenable.
I don't think it's untenable. I just think it's I think the arbitrariness is just a fact of the world. I don't like it's inconvenient, sure, but I think that's how the world is.
So I mean,
right,
I mean,
and to you and I, of course, that I mean, I can't think of anything sort of more absurd, right? But to them, they bite the bullet and say, "Yeah, so what?" And what do you say to that?
I'd say you can't bite that bullet. I don't think that's a bullet that you can bite because
I also think they're lying, actually, as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think what I would say is that if you were genuinely, you genuinely held the belief,
I want to, this is important. I want to. He did not deny the Holocaust. Let's make that clear. However, what he says, under his framework, he doesn't deny the Holocaust. But what he believes is that whether the Holocaust happened or not just depends on who you are and how you feel. So whether the Holocaust happened or not just depends on who you are, and it doesn't depend on something out in the world. Just So I'm not clipped as accusing him of denying the Holocaust or something. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, like, all of his thought was the idea of, like, presuppositional, that you could just assert presuppositions in the first place and then create a system on top of that. Of course, all of this relies upon logic because that's the way humans think. I think Wittgenstein said that in the Tractatus, didn't he? He said that, we cannot think illogically. It just goes beyond our ability as rational agents. And I heard you trying to express that to him.
Yes. What is it? We can't form in a picture of an impossible state of affairs. Yes.
Yeah, it goes beyond reason, and I think that the fact of the matter is that he has to have asserted reason and logic for him to be able to create a grammatically understandable sentence. If he was saying, I mean, like, let's say he was genuinely honest, and I don't think he could have been in this scenario, because I think if you are genuinely honest to say that you did not believe or did not you do not commit yourself epistemically to, the laws of logic, then there would be no difference between you and someone with psychosis. I mean, you would literally you would definitionally become insane. There would be nothing that would allow you to metaphysically divest one object from another to the point in which you would end up in that, spiral whirlpool of just objects becoming merged into one, separating into another, and there would be nothing holding them constant. And he kept relying upon this idea of empiricism. I don't know if you heard him assert that a lot.
Right. Okay. So if you acknowledge that, and you're a moral anti-realist, so there is actually no choice of the matter which theory of truth is, right? Then you also acknowledge that any empirical statement I make is also arbitrary.
I mean, I think it would be arbitrary insofar as we would have to disagree on, like, the meaning of truth. But I think that most people have subscribed to the idea that truth means something that can be empirically verified. If a person disagreed with that, I would have to kill them. I'm going to keep going back to that argument a few times, so I hope you don't mind hearing it. That's my answer. If people disagree with me, and that they disagree with me in a way that I think harms the world, and I can't resolve that disagreement by appealing to it. No, of course not. That's how history works.
Empirical claims, but those empirical claims are based upon metaphysical norms in the first place, which he mightn't be. I understand he did sociology, so he mightn't be, acquainted with this. But of course, like, these are actually they're not grounded simply in what you see. They're grounded in what you think. And if nothing's holding your thinking constant, and you genuinely don't think logically, then you will actually enter something reminiscent of psychosis. At least I would argue so.
Coming at this from the more analytic background, an argument I'm more familiar with, which perhaps can map onto your idea of there ultimately needing to exist a type of normativity to distinguish between, for differentiation in the field of ontology. Carnap, in his ontology, or I guess would be a meta-ontology, which I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with. His argument is basically we can draw a distinction between internal questions and external questions depending on the framework that we're in. So when I ask a question like, does the number 2 exist? That will be an inner question relative to a framework of arithmetic, right? Because I can frame that properly within that. But if I then want to ask that, well, not relative to the framework, but objectively transcending that framework, well, then it becomes an external question, and that's simply a question that really can't be answered, and it's going to be just simply dependent on what framework you are operating within. And so one of the issues that I have with this kind of approach to philosophy, of everything being just linguistic frameworks and, things having meaning only relative to a framework, is, well, how do you determine whether something is conducive to one framework or another? It seems to me that requires another framework. But doesn't that framework itself need a framework? And you get this sort of infinite regress by which you have no neutral ground with which to evaluate different frameworks from one another.
Exactly. There has to be almost an objective sphere of like a rule which differentiates the rules from each other, like as if we're speaking about science or religion. How do we determine that each community is that community? How do you know that I'm speaking with one rule set and not another? And the only way that you could do that is if there was something in my words which allowed you to identify and understand, which means that you have to have a faculty which is being held to a standard outside of that, base linguistic. linguistic relativism. And I think that's Brandon's point, actually. I think, in the words of Aristotle, it's not where you begin, it's where you end. So I think that's kind of the point in which the whole point of logic in the first place, this idea of logical thinking. It's since we cannot help but think rationally, at least to some degree, and metaphysically divesting the world, it gives us the opportunity to pursue truth. And in as much that we continue that pursuit, we will come to conclusions, whether they be right or wrong, and those conclusions can be measured against reality itself. Now the problem is that people like vaush in this situation make such an arbitrary standard for truth that everything becomes possible, and in as much as he makes literally everything impossible, there is no standard. It's an infinite whirlpool of just assertion.
Could say there is a rock on this desk.
Why?
I don't think those are the same types of relativity.
Why?
Because one of them is directly a moral consideration, whereas the other one is only downstream of one's moral consideration of a definition, the definition of truth.
Right, but if you acknowledge that a definition of truth is ultimately relative,
I don't think everything downstream of relativity is relative.
Of whether rock is.
It has an influence, but I don't think everything downstream of relativity is necessarily relative.
Well, no, I mean, if I say if I say truth is what makes me feel good, right, and I'm a flat earther, then yeah, the shape of the earth is directly impacted by my theory of truth.
But I think we can make empirical statements even from within that framework. I think that even if you're downstream of a relative position, you can still make empirical statements.
What is empirical is going to be relative to your theory of truth, because what is empirical is what is true, right, in the world.
Yeah.
And P is not P in every scenario.
What is empirical is arguably the closest thing
I mean, it's
to the truth, not necessarily true. That's the point. Data gives you an idea of truth, not like a rough sketch of the truth, not the whole thing.
The issue is we can't even really say anything about the position itself.
Well, there is no position. I think that's madness. That's why I was saying there isn't.
We can't even say that, though, can we? Right?
Oh, I absolutely think we can.
I guess. But if we are within. Well, no, again, it's so hard to even discuss that kind of worldview. And this is why ultimately I think these people are lying to themselves and they're just trying to create something quote unquote consistent so they can justify whatever the hell they want, I suppose. Or maybe there are people that, I think a lot of math students personally can get into this type of frame of mind where everything's built on arbitrary frameworks and all depends on what axioms you're using and whatnot. I think that could be a really big issue.
Well, when the alarm bells kind of went off when he said he majored in sociology
Really?
for me.
Okay.
Because I've met a lot of sociologists and there's some of them who are brilliant. And some that I thought was brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denying that the utility of all sociology. So don't worry, sociologists. I wouldn't do that. But I think that many sociologists prefer to assert whatever they join sociology to believe. So one school of thought over another. And it happens in all fields, but I feel like sociology, at least in my experience, sociologists have done that a lot. And I think that, it's almost ironically in the case of vaush, it's almost the regressivist progressivist. He's progressed to the point in which he says that nothing is real, nothing is true, and therefore it doesn't matter what you think. Man. And then he's just going to force whatever he wants upon you. He's so woke that he's become a fascist.
Truth is relative. You can't use probability to then determine.
No, I can say, hey, I think that truth means things are empirically verifiable. There's a rock on this table. Let me bring 100 people in and ask them where the rock is. Now I do it with another 100 people.
And they all say a bunch of stuff, but you don't believe in objective meaning. It's all relative. So you can't actually know for certain that outside of your own world, that they are doing anything to inform your position.
No, if they say the rock's on the table, then I can generally understand that we're probably going to agree on empirical reality.
Okay, I'm trying to explain. So
you want me to kill all the other people? I can if I want to.
No. So a theory of meaning, because I'm trying to explain.
Comfortable doing. All I can do.
Nor can you say comfortably that the Holocaust happened.
I can say that, actually.
How can you say that if the truth of that is
because any person who would disagree with that is the sort of person who I would seek to bully out of discourse through force, and I would be more. And
so anyone who disagrees with you ethically should die.
How many times do I have to repeat this? If they have huge
anyone who disagrees
if they have
on
huge presuppositional differences with me on ethics and what is and is not
Okay.
good, then yeah, that's how history has worked.
And it's absolutely madness, and I think that just shows you that if he is genuine, then he really shouldn't be listened to, and if he isn't genuine, then he really shouldn't be listened to.
Mhm.
And that's not me saying that this is a power play. I'm saying because of the content of what he's saying is either a fantastical mess in which he himself does not understand, as he asserts.
of abstract thinking, unless you are in a vegetative state or something.
Well, can you convince me empirically that my definition of rational agent is better or worse than your
It's not.
definition of rational
This is not an
agent?
empirical discussion. It's a theoretical discussion. It's an a priori, what we call a priori. It's before experience. So mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4.
I don't think
Wonderful.
I don't think you
depend on
can.
the
I don't think
state
you
of
have an.
the
I don't
world.
think you can have an a priori understanding of these terms.
I mean, I don't understand what you
I
mean
don't,
by
I don't.
that.
I don't know. I don't know if there's any understanding that can predicate experience. I feel like experience is the only way we can begin to understand even abstract concepts.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So experience itself will give rise to certain intuitions that we have, but that doesn't mean that the content is empirical. Like, for example, when I am taught that 2 + 2 = 4, it's not that that is an empirical concept being given to me. It's that there's some empirical thing in the world that prompts me to recognize that a priori, analytically. Its justification doesn't come from the world itself, but we know it intuitively.
We're already outside my wheelhouse. I recognize that I'm not capable of fully following the arguments that you're making.
Right. That ultimately, yeah, that does underlie our entire dispute.
Yeah,
Right,
but
because you're
I don't
working
know if I
within
have
a-
the education to
If you
argue.
don't have the education, then why are you?
Or he's lying. So
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd roughly agree with that.
Vaush? No,
Perspective
he
philosophy is
doesn't
not
lie.
calling Vaush a fascist. Okay, he is saying that when you go down that type of position, your position starts to essentially entail everything. If I'm interpreting you right, perspective philosophy.
yeah, I mean, like essentially what I'm saying, I'm not saying that he's like actually like labeled himself a fascist. What I'm saying is that by adopting a view that made power relations the primary methodology of truth, as in there is no truth, there is only power, the only thing that differentiates him between a fascist is the arbitrary label from which he gives himself. It's the fact that, like, essentially, what I would say, I mean, not only will his ethical conclusions be exactly the same, because I would say fascism's fundamentally based upon notions of might makes right anyway, but that the only thing that differentiates his position and their position is the fact that he asserts that it is different, that he asserts that it is better, and that we should accept it.
But what would you say to someone like I'm sure people get angry and say, well, look, but his ethical conclusions aren't going to lead like his, he calls himself a socialist.
Yeah, the
right?
conclusions
So
themselves
the
are
way
not
that
going
he
to
interacts
lead
with
to
the world is
lead
still
to
going
fascist
result in
outcomes.
different outcomes than a fascist would.
Well, I'd say that that is very ifs and ands, if ifs and ands were pots and pans, I think the reality is that the only reason that you think they're going to
Wonderful.
result in different scenarios is because you've made assumptions about what he will and will not assert. He calls himself a socialist, which inspires, a hegemonic notion of, an identity which can then be associated with certain belief systems, but it also gives him a position of, ideological power from which to assert whatever he deems to be true or not under that brand of of socialism. So if he takes his position as like a socialist leader, and which is kind of doing by having a platform with a considerable amount of notions, he says, if my arguments make your dick hard, then follow me and stick around. That's all it's about. It's a hegemonic organization used to force an ideology, and that's pretty much identical with what fascism was, which is why I kind of brought it up. I mean, it's kind of Gramsci's position.
Oh, so basically, they are no longer concerned with what is actually true, because I mean, truth isn't really a thing to them in the way that ordinary people conceive of it. It is merely, if you feel what I feel, jump on board, and then we're going to rhetorically smash anything that stands in our way.
Yeah, I mean, like, essentially,
I mean, he did literally say that on stream. For the record, he literally said that anyone who ultimately disagrees with my ethical conclusions needs to die.
Yeah, he basically said that he'd force them down. That if they had a differing
If
ideology,
the
he would
disagreement
force
is
them down.
substantial.
I understand that his emotions.
If the gap is too much,
and that what he was kind
what
of
do you do
saying is
then?
that like
It's
if
like that's
someone
the
was
idea.
so ethically repugnant to him that they were a fascist, he would berate them into submission. I think I understand like his position in that respect. That he's like, I'm not going to reason with a Nazi. The irony is by rejecting reason, he is himself rejected the very notion of Nazism being wrong.
I agree with this, but I would just say we have to be very careful here.
But he even rejected the notion of Nazism being different. The point is not as to
I 100% agree with you, but I'm also mindful of how people are going to perceive this and how people are going to clip. I do literally fund it because the position entails everything. So literally anything you say about his position is true.
It's metaphysical. It's not ideological in the sense that it's like I'm not saying vaush is X, Y, Z. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that vaush's conclusions allow for anything, whether they agree with his ideology or not, because his ideology is based on his subjective framework, quote unquote, which is not being held to a standard in any degree, which means it's entirely malleable and can morph into whatever he wants it to be. We're acting in good faith here when we say that we think he's lying, because by saying that we think he's lying or that he's, or highly mistaken and confused, what we're actually saying is that we believe that, he believes in egalitarianism. We believe that he believes in these, equality and consideration of others, in as much as that logic will allow us to come to those conclusions, which is what he's denying. So we're saying that he's just so wrong that he doesn't even understand that he's actually, pigeonholing himself.
It's only that by his approach to determining how to
Pigeonhole?
do this, that very same approach is what is used by fascists and Nazis to justify their conclusions. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, which is very true, and I think metaphysically, it's something that can be used to justify anything, and it would prevent. What we want to say is that, at least I want to say, is that I believe he is what he is because logic and reason allows me to come to those conclusions that the ideology of socialism would not be compatible with the ideology of fascism. But if he was right, then his ideology would be compatible with fascism. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and obviously,
that's absurd.
I'm aware that people don't have a super high or don't have a really long attention span often, and so people will hear words like, fascist, vaush, and people will think that we're calling him someone who is actively engaging, with fascist rhetoric. Which I mean, at a high level,
Everyone knows you're not
that's
doing that. Shut the fuck up.
Rhetorical tactics, but not rhetoric.
Yes, but his ethical views right now, not his meta-ethical, because we think the meta-ethical are generally the same.
I'm explaining that the position that you currently hold is unable to be justified beyond anything rather than just what you feel.
Yeah,
and
yes, that's all positions I have.
Hold on. And in that respect, it is just as justifiable as a Nazi or as an anti-Semite.
Yes, as a matter of internal... Yes, I know. I have always said that. I have argued many times before that when it comes to people with different axiomatic values, that there's nothing you can do except beat them.
But the ethical, the normative ethical, about what he wants the world to look like right now are, of course, not consistent with, a fascist or not. Like, those are consistent, as far as we know, with egalitarianism, and helping the working class, helping minorities, etc., etc. We just want to say that by taking the meta-ethical perspective that he does towards what it means for something to be ethical in the first place, you create this type of this structure between you and the people who listen to you that essentially breeds, well, if you agree with me, if you feel the same way as me, jump on board and don't really delve into the truth of the claims that we're talking about. No one is capable of holding this belief that everything is completely arbitrary. It's just psychologically it's impossible, but it doesn't matter if it's psychologically impossible. What really matters is if it's epistemically possible, and it can't be. I don't know how it could be.
I genuinely don't think it can be either. I mean, unless someone has a metaphysic that has outright, disproven, Wittgenstein and Hegel at this point.
Well, they don't care. They see the if you ever bring up a philosopher, they see it as an appeal. Like at the end of that discussion, right? I try to tell them, there is literally no professional philosopher except for two that I know of, and those are like hardcore epistemic instrumentalists. There is no actually I don't know. That's not true. Actually, I don't think there are any because even those instrumentalists allow for that sort of objective framework. So I don't know of any philosopher in history, really, who would agree with the type of position that he's advocating for. I'm telling you, and this might be seen as gatekeeping or being condescending.
Fucking
okay, that's fine, or elitism or whatever. But I'm telling you, basically, no philosopher writing in the literature, except for two that I know of, would ever hold a position.
I don't care. This is the most boring denunciation I've ever heard.
And maybe I'm wrong, and I'm, not familiar enough, but. Marty, do you know any?
I have read some of the.
Thank you.
I have read some of the error theorists who, reply to the companions in guilt. And they seem
but that's different, right? Because they don't bite the bullet; they reject the argument, which is fine. Reject the argument by saying, "Well, there is a division in normativity.
Yeah,
the normative web doesn't exist."
This is something that I also. Because it was odd, you occasionally go to philosophy chat rooms and they seem to really enjoy this conversation that we had a while back ago, Rem, with JHC about this sort of epistemological nihilism, and they think it's a good reply.
I don't understand where it's coming from.
But, most of the literature that rejects the companions in guilt argument is, all latent with normativity.
I know, it's ridiculous.
They don't reject epistemological normativity
That's why I said there's only two in the literature, but for some reason I don't know what but I think it makes sense. It's the ultimate non-position, right?
What is?
You say no to literally everything.
Well, I think the weird thing is this is my whole point. Like if you were to take this position, there would be nothing to differentiate madness and or sanity and insanity. The whole point is that you come to the conclusion that the only difference was a normative structure, and not even Foucault does. I will say I've read Madness and Civilization, and I did not get that impression from Foucault, who says madness is an instrumental weapon of society. Like the whole point is that there is madness and then there is insanity. There is a separation in let's say moral thinking and certain types of epistemic norms which are culturally embedded, and then
there we go.
Logic and reason itself,
Finally got it.
which allows us to reject fictions which could not be possible. Hence, I would be insane if I believed I was made of glass, and that if I moved I would shatter, because fundamentally that would be a fiction I could not free myself from, but it would still be a fiction, which Foucault maintains.
Yeah, I think we need to show. I think everyone needs to show that there's a disparity between scientific norms and moral norms.
Oh, there aren't. I mean, I wish people would.
I haven't seen a difference yet.
How do we go about, as people who study philosophy, go about responding to the ultimate skeptic like vaush, in a way, is the goal there that we try to convince this person? Do we think that they're beyond convincing? Do we have to come at it meanly? Do we have to just not engage with them? What do you think the strategy would be for engaging with these people in the first place?
Would you like to answer that, Marty, or shall I?
You can go ahead first if you want. I mean, I don't mind.
Well, I would essentially just take the Socratic approach. He was dealing with the exact same kind of, the people in the first place with the sophists and the rhetoricians. The idea is that these are people who are acting in bad faith, looking for a contradiction.
Thanks for the stun.
And you give them the discussion only to try and to demonstrate the inadequacies of that thinking. It doesn't mean that they're going to walk away and agree with you, but that the fact that this is an argument of performance allows the onlookers to analyze both positions and make their mind up themselves. And since I think both me and Marty would agree that we are rational because of the way being is, at least has the propensity to be rational, that you're giving them the opportunity at least to see where the rational position lies.
Right. I think in my discussion with them, it's hard. Well, so actually, this is what I was doing with him, but I don't know when you were watching. But I got to the point where, because I was just trying to basically probe him, and then we got to the point where he says, "Well, what would be your solution to it?"
You can't even prove you don't have the exact same hypocritical position and you're going to lecture me on mine? Just explain why your ethical system allows you to compel people to go vegan but not to boycott other commodities.
I have not said anything about my own ethical positions here.
I want to know because you are more learned than me.
I'm asking you to defend your own, Vaush.
I am recognizing that you can arbitrarily draw lines anywhere. That is my concession. I believe that, and I have always believed that, and I have always been consistent in that position.
Because we were talking about, you know, whether it's ethical to consume meat or not, and he says, well, you know, for someone who thinks that we shouldn't consume meat, how can they justify consuming or buying, you know, clothing and these other commodities that are created under an unjust system and whatnot? And so when I basically showed the complete arbitrariness of his position, where he was drawing this line completely arbitrarily. He then said, well, what's your solution to this? And I said, well, that's not relevant to the conversation. I'm asking you to provide I'm asking you for you to justify your position. He says, well, you should be able to give me your position and explain to me what is the correct position. And I try to explain to him, like,
that doesn't seem to follow though. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, like if you
that's just a bad input.
It is, and I don't know how to. I try to explain, like, if I have a math problem and someone tries to give a solution for the math problem, and I show them where the inference went wrong, the person isn't somehow more right by saying, well, where's your solution to the problem? I mean, if that was the case, proofs in mathematics would not exist.
If you've given me a math proof, for example, and I show that it's inconsistent,
I think yours is equally.
No, that can't be. Well, you don't have another proof for it.
No, I think yours is equally inconsistent. You don't have a better answer. You actually don't have a solution to this, do you? It's hypocrisy.
But that doesn't matter. If I've shown that an argument doesn't work, it doesn't.
Okay, so does yours work then? So does yours work? You're hiding the math proof on a piece of paper behind your back. Does yours work? And mine doesn't. You're not going to show it to me because you don't want me to critique it.
I'm not here claiming to have a solution to the problem.
I disagree with this. I disagreed about this like with you a year ago, and I still disagree about it with you. And I think you're flirting your point by coming off so fucking condescending. You realize this is the definition of sophomore, right? You haven't even graduated, and you're already telling everyone their positions are invalid unless they read the books that you like to read before you fall asleep each night. It's really weird and ostracizing. If you really wanted to affect positive change, what you would do is come on here and try to like explain to me calmly where you think my positions are incorrect. But instead, you came here, spent an hour.
When you're done acting like a child.
Spent an hour reminding me that I'm a moral anti-realist, refused to give any contrary position or explain any of the inconsistencies I believe in.
I said, let's have the discussion about whether your position is true. Okay, so if we acknowledge that is where we are at,
that's a weird
and it's going to be difficult because it's a more complex discussion, and I'm sure we're going to lose the chat, right? But let's try to have a higher level conversation about moral anti-realism.
I don't know if I'm philosophically equipped to have a higher order conversation.
So yeah, if you were struggling, I'm going to. I came on here, okay. I tried to figure out whether, like, let's just go through. I tried to figure out if you're a moral anti-realist or not, and eventually we reached that point. At which point I said, well, we can have that meta discussion, which we did. I then pressed you on being a moral anti-realist, and what is it that you said? You said that you are incapable of having that discussion because you're not educated in it. And I said, okay, well, let me try to give you an argument. And then as soon as you say, well, no, I'm not understanding, you then completely insult me.
Because no one would be able to refute anything until they come up with their own solution. So, you know, you get this, you can try to do the Socratic method, but then you get, I mean, people who aren't even conducive to the Socratic method in the first place.
I guess it depends on how many commitments that they want to endorse or have, right? But I would try to probably work with the sort of commitments that they're willing to make, and then also sort of offer, depending on it, what the issue is, right? Like, let's say that, you know, that they're not willing to accept like a priori claims at all, like even analytic ones. And I would ask, like, well, what do you take like definitional claims to be or tautologies to be? Those seem to be at least a priori analytic. And with like synthetic claims, you could just be like, well, denial of a priori synthetic claim is itself an a priori synthetic claim.
Well, it's difficult.
You're giving him far too much credit in this scenario.
Well, yeah, because I brought this up.
Way further, right?
I brought this up, and I said, I mean, with mathematics, these are things that are known a priori. He's like, well, no, we know them empirically. I'm like, okay, wait, I'm seeing the. I mean, this is the film 101 confusion, right? Which is that
mathematical claims are inductive, then he's misunderstanding what a priori claims are.
Exactly, and
this is common, right? So a priori claims aren't ones that are divorced from experience. They're just dependent experience.
Exactly, and so I was trying to explain to him that. I mean, I made this mistake. I remember when I was originally reading Controverter, I didn't understand this, you know, but a priori is not concerned with like the genealogical. That's a pretentious word, but the actual process by which I come to know a truth. It's the way that the truth is justified, or you know,
universal.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, there's something about
necessary is the right word. Necessary, I think, would be the right word. It is true by definition. It's tautologically undeniable.
And you might come to know it empirically, right, through a conversation with your master or something that 2 + 2 = 4, right? But that doesn't mean that truth is empirical. It just means that you come to know it empirically.
But I don't think he understood. At least I got the kind of feeling that he mightn't have understood the definition of empirical.
No, absolutely he didn't, right? But it's hard for me to then sit there and, because I mean I'm already being called pretentious. So for me to sit there and like give him a philosophy 101 definition by definition of all of this stuff is extremely difficult.
Don't mean to sound bad, but that's exactly what he kind of needs.
I know it is what he needs, right? But I can't go on there and say, well, I mean, I get called the gatekeeper and whatnot. Just read some books on the subject before you start talking about them, right? Don't talk about veganism if you're unable to go into justifying your position.
No, I think it goes far worse than that. I mean, like the fact that he said that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, but then denied ethics.
That's a good point. Yes.
I think there's a lot of inconsistencies there in general. I think, to be entirely honest with you, the idea is that this idea of ethical consumption under capitalism, this rejection. I think you tried to bring it up, didn't you? I think you tried to say that, like, if you didn't need to buy clothes, then it might be unethical to buy clothes because it would be an unnecessary expenditure, which would then cause someone to suffer. But then, if you are to, let's say, you aren't given a choice in this, but like, let's say you are placed in a scenario where you could, like, let's say, see this exploitation going on, and you knew that every time you bought clothes, some poor kid was going to have to, lose a hand in a sweatshop, then you would be able to see the harm you are doing, and you could say that overconsumption of these products is an unethical act because I can see the mechanism of capitalism turning, But even if, like, all of that is true, and there is no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism, and you were to say, actually, you know what, there are 2 sweatshops now, and there is one where every time a child loses 2 hands, or dies, or whatever, every per 100 clothes, and there's another where a child doesn't die, and he's exploited, but not exploited as greatly. The whole notion of exploitation in the first place that is implicit within Marxist philosophy implies the notion that there is a human dignity which is to be respected, and ethics at its foundation. And that implies that there is more or less ethical consumption. It doesn't imply that you have to agree with capitalism by, I buy, fair trade idea is better. Doesn't mean that you agree with capitalism. It just means that this is a nicer form, a nicer way of consuming under capitalism. And I just don't see how he didn't understand that. But I think that's implicit within Marx. I would definitely argue that. And I really think that's true. I think that, like, having, like, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics under your belt before you start something like politics, which I think, the Greeks understood to be.
Yeah, I've definitely grown to appreciate that perspective. It doesn't seem like you can read Marx or read good political philosophy without some sort of ontology or metaphysics. I'm not saying that, people in the everyday world have to be committed to certain types of meta-ethical positions, or do they have to know epistemology like, something like Marx does, but I mean, damn, it does help. I mean, it's really going to reorientate your views on how you view things correctly,
actually, you made a great point there. You know, when you said like ordinary people don't need to read these things. That's not to say that ordinary people, don't care about what's true or not. It's just that they might not have time or the inclination to research these things at such a high level. Just as I don't have the time and inclination to research, how jet turbines work, or how whatever empirical or variation of field you can imagine. I mean, there are so many fields out there that are vital to my experience of the world. Like if my pipes don't get fixed, if my rubbish doesn't get taken away, if my society's not run in the proper respect in terms of logistics, I will definitely feel it, and I care about those fields greatly. I just simply do not have the time or the inclination to do the work myself. I play my role as a cog in the machine, as it were. And that's why I think that like vaush is kind of disingenuous when he says that that people don't have people don't care about ethics. Oh, people very much do care about ethics. They are very ethically invested. They simply do not care about looking into ethics. And if you say that people will engage with ethics otherwise, that's not to say that those people are bad. It's that they can be misled and misguided, just as I might try and create a jet turbine. I'm not going to be successful, but I'll try and do it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. And I mean, people who were say, I mean, I've always applied this argument, this need to do research in philosophy. I think it scales depending on the amount of influence that you have on people. So I think, like, the ordinary, like, let's say like a single mom, who's working multiple jobs, has to take care of kids, their responsibility to go out and read on ethics, I think, is not as great as someone who is literally talking about ethical issues in front of hundreds of thousands of people, right? I think as soon as you start to have a very crucial and influential part in people's lives, where they will start to, and especially if you created sort of like a cult-like, a cult-like type of fan base around you, I think that can be really dangerous, and you need to take extra precaution and a ton of extra steps to ensure that what you are saying is right. And that's why I try to be so careful now. And I still slip up sometimes about, I only really want to talk about issues that I feel confident on. Like I brought up on stream, I had talked about aesthetics a long time ago, and I regret doing so because I really have not read enough aesthetics to feel comfortable.
I completely agree. I haven't even read Hegel's aesthetic much. I would argue that it was more prescriptive than descriptive. I don't think, like, for one, it comes with the threat of violence. Like either I will berate you, I will destroy you.
Vaush historically has not been.
I think actually, funnily enough, he's put in a state of war. Ideologically, I think that it's either that we. I mean, like it's like, for example, not all countries go to war, even though they have different goals. It's only when those goals actively collide in such a way that they're motivated to war that they go to war. In as much that. It's not as much that vaush will, outright destroy you if you disagree. It's that if you disagree enough, or if your disagreement, impacted his ideology enough, then he will go to war.
Our main story tonight concerns tasers.
No, because I'm saying that there's.
It's not as much that vaush will, outright destroy you if you disagree.
Oh, so that's it.
Not a problem. Don't get cocky. destroyed a turret. I know what I'm doing. Killing spree. An enemy has been slain. Summoner. Your team has destroyed a turret. Your team has destroyed
Oh,
a turret.
GG's.